Have you ever heard of a man who started out as a simple soldier, became Emperor of France, and nearly conquered all of Europe? This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte, one of the most brilliant and controversial leaders in history. But behind the epic battles, the crowns and the lightning victories, lies an even more fascinating story of betrayals, boundless ambition, and a meteoric rise that ended in a lonely exile. In this video, we will delve into the smallest details of Napoleon's life, from his humble birth in Corsica to his final downfall on an isolated island in the middle of the ocean. Get ready for an intense and cinematic narrative, because the story you are about to see is worthy of a movie. But it really happened. Napoleon Bonaparte was born on August 15, 1769, in the city of Ajaccio, on the island of Corsica. The island had been acquired by France shortly before his birth, which meant that although Napoleon considered himself a proud Corsican, he was technically French. His family was of minor nobility, without great influence, but with the prestige necessary to send the young Napoleon to study in mainland France. From an early age, he demonstrated a sharp intellect, a reserved personality, and an ambition that knew no bounds. In 1779, at the age of 10, he was sent to the military college of Brienne-le-Château. There, he suffered from prejudice for being a foreigner and for his strong Corsican accent. This caused him to develop a more solitary and determined attitude, focusing almost exclusively on mathematics and military history, two areas that would shape his destiny. In 1785, at just 16 years old, Napoleon completed his training at the École Militaire in Paris and was commissioned as a lieutenant in the artillery. The young officer soon found himself immersed in a country on the verge of explosion. The French Revolution was on the horizon, and the monarchy was crumbling. Napoleon saw the revolution as an opportunity. While others saw chaos, he saw ladders to climb. His first big break came in 1793, during the Siege of Toulon, when he demonstrated tactical genius in recapturing the city from the Royalists. He was promoted to Brigadier General at the age of 24. A few years later, in 1795, he saved the revolutionary government by suppressing a royalist revolt in Paris with a famous volley of cannonballs. This brought him closer to powerful figures in the Directory, the French government at the time, and paved the way for even greater missions. In 1796, Napoleon was appointed commander of the French army in Italy. At the head of poorly paid and poorly equipped soldiers, he transformed that unmotivated army into a ruthless war machine. Using revolutionary strategies, he defeated several Austrian and Italian coalitions in battles such as Lodi, Arcole, and Rivoli. His soldiers came to call him Little Corporal, an affectionate nickname that hid his military genius. The campaign in Italy not only enriched France with tribute and works of art, but also catapulted Napoleon into the spotlight of Europe. It began to shape his image as an invincible hero, a myth in the making that would be used masterfully in propaganda. By the end of this campaign, he was not just a general. He was a national celebrity and a symbol of hope for a people exhausted by war and political instability. In 1798, Napoleon led an expedition to Egypt with the aim of cutting off British access to India and expanding the French Empire. Although the military campaign had initial successes, such as victory at the Battle of the Pyramids, the French Navy was annihilated by Horatio Nelson's British fleet at the Battle of the Nile. Napoleon, however, did not let his failure tarnish him. During his stay, he took scientists and scholars with him, which resulted in important archaeological discoveries, including the famous Rosetta Stone. Despite the naval defeat and difficult fighting in the desert, Napoleon managed to manipulate French public opinion. In 1799, realizing that the political situation in France was unstable, he secretly returned, leaving his army behind. He knew that the time for a coup d'etat was near, and he was right. On November 9, 1799, known as 18 Brumaire in the revolutionary calendar, Napoleon overthrew the Directory in a coup that was virtually unopposed. With the support of the army and the political elite, he established the consulate, assuming the position of first consul, a position that gave him almost absolute control over the French government. It was the beginning of a new regime, with a republican appearance but an authoritarian soul. Napoleon reorganized the public administration, reformed the judicial system, and stabilized the economy. His popularity grew even more, with the people seeing in him a symbol of order amidst the chaos. In a few years, he transformed France into an organized, efficient, and feared power. But he was not satisfied with limited power. Napoleon wanted more. He wanted to be emperor, and he was already preparing the ground for it. On December 2nd, 1804, at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, Napoleon performed an act that has gone down in history. In front of Pope Pius VII, he placed the crown on his own head, refusing to be crowned by any other man. The scene was symbolic. He was above the church, above the nobles, and above any tradition. He was the emperor because the people wanted him to be. As Emperor of the French, Napoleon began what became known as the First French Empire. He implemented the Napoleonic Code, the basis of many modern legal systems, and strengthened education, creating technical schools and universities. But the empire did not live on reforms alone. Napoleon began to dream big, much bigger. His goal now was to redraw the map of Europe, placing Paris as the center of a new world. Once crowned emperor, Napoleon began one of the most devastating series of conflicts in European history, the Napoleonic Wars. His first major victory came in 1805 at the legendary Battle of Austerlitz, also known as the Battle of the Three Emperors. Using brilliant tactics, he defeated the Austrian and Russian armies, cementing his reputation as invincible. The following year, he dissolved the Holy Roman Empire and reconfigured the German states under his influence, creating the Confederation of the Rhine. In 1807, after defeating the Prussians at Jena Auerstedt, he forced Russia to sign the Treaty of Tilsit. Europe was on its knees, but even as the map changed in his favor, the seeds of his downfall were already beginning to germinate. England remained resistant, and Napoleon, unable to defeat it by sea, instituted the Continental Blockade in an attempt to suffocate the British economically. This decision would cause friction with several nations, including Spain and Russia, and would turn allies into enemies. In 1808, Napoleon made one of the greatest strategic mistakes of his career, invading the Iberian Peninsula. He deposed the Spanish king and placed his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte, on the throne. This provoked a widespread insurrection and the beginning of a bloody war marked by guerrilla tactics that drained the resources of the French Empire. The Peninsular War was brutal and long. With the support of England, led by Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington, the Spanish and Portuguese waged a war of attrition against the French. The morale of the French troops plummeted, and losses were constant. For the first time, the myth of Napoleon's invincibility began to crumble. The peninsula became a political and military quagmire. Despite winning several battles, Napoleon was unable to contain popular resistance. This prolonged conflict was one of the main factors that weakened his empire and left his troops scattered, vulnerable to what was to come. The relationship between Napoleon and Tsar Alexander I of Russia soured over time, especially because of the Continental Blockade, which Russia chose to ignore. In response, Napoleon made another fatal mistake, invading Russian territory. In 1812, he assembled the largest army Europe had ever seen, with over 600,000 men, and marched towards Moscow. But the Russians avoided direct confrontation and adopted a scorched earth tactic, burning crops and villages so that the French would have no food. The Battle of Borodino was fierce but inconclusive. When Napoleon finally reached Moscow, the city was empty and in flames. Without supplies, without shelter, and with the Russian winter approaching, he ordered a retreat. The retreat from Russia was a living hell. Hunger, cold, disease, and constant attacks decimated the French army. Of the more than 600,000 soldiers who left, less than 100,000 returned. It was the beginning of the end. With the Russian catastrophe, Napoleon's enemies saw their chance. A new coalition was formed, bringing together England, Prussia, Austria, and Russia. In 1813, Napoleon was still fighting hard and even winning victories, but his resources were exhausted. At the Battle of the Nations at Leipzig, he was finally defeated by a vastly superior combined force. With Paris under siege and betrayed by former allies, Napoleon was forced to abdicate in April 1814. As punishment, he was exiled to the island of Elba, off the coast of Italy, with a small number of soldiers and the title Emperor of Elba. Meanwhile, the French monarchy was restored with Louis XVI on the throne. Many believed that the Napoleonic era was over, but Napoleon, with his usual audacity, was preparing the most unlikely of returns. He was not yet ready to disappear from history. His destiny called him one last time. On February 26, 1815, Napoleon escaped from Elba and landed in France. He marched towards Paris, and as he advanced, his old troops joined him. Not a shot was fired. When he reached the capital, he was welcomed as a hero. The 100 Days had begun, the brief and final chapter of his rule. Napoleon knew he did not have much time. The European powers quickly formed a new coalition. In June 1815, he marched into Belgium and faced the British, led by Wellington and the Prussians under Blücher. The Battle of Waterloo on June 18th was the decisive clash. At first, Napoleon had the upper hand, but the arrival of the Prussian troops turned the tide. In the rain, mud, and heavy fire, the French did not resist. Napoleon was definitively defeated. The myth was shattered. Without allies and without an army, he was captured and this time sent much further away. After his defeat, Napoleon was exiled to the remote island of Saint Helena, in the middle of the South Atlantic, controlled by the British. Isolated, guarded, and in poor health, he spent his last years dictating memoirs to his faithful companions, trying to justify his actions and rebuild his image for posterity. Life on St. Helena was hard. The climate was hostile, food was scarce, and surveillance was constant. Little by little, Napoleon fell ill. On May 5, 1821, he died at the age of 51, probably from stomach cancer, although theories of poisoning still circulate. He was buried on the island, but in 1840, his body was taken back to France, where it now rests in Les Invalides in Paris. Even after his defeat, his legend was already immortalized. His name would echo for centuries as that of a man who dared to change the world with his intelligence, ambition, and courage. Napoleon was known for his height, but he was not as short as people say. He was about 1.68, the average height for his time. His strategic genius is still studied today in military academies around the world. The Napoleonic Code influenced the legislation of several countries, including Brazil. He was also responsible for reforming the French education system and for creating the Bank of France. Another notable legacy was his ability to mobilize. Napoleon showed that a man with charisma, intelligence, and audacity could literally rewrite history. His image remains controversial. For some, he was an imperialist tyrant. For others, a modern hero who brought order and progress to France. But no one can deny that his trajectory, full of twists and turns, glories and tragedies, is one of the most impressive that humanity has ever known. And if history is made by those who dare, Napoleon Bonaparte is, without a doubt, one of its greatest authors. If this story has already captivated you so far, just imagine what's yet to come. So don't waste any more time. Subscribe to the channel now, activate the bell so you don't miss the next episodes, and leave a like. This will really help this content reach more people who, like you, are passionate about history. And take the opportunity to comment below. What other character or historical moment would you like to see here? Your suggestion could become the channel's next video, so you can be part of this journey.